Hello everyone, welcome back to the fabrication shop. Today we're going to continue with our Scrambler build and we're going to be getting the model ready for paint. This will entail filling the fins, filling the grain of the balsa wood, as well as filling the spiral lines that are on the body tube. Now on the table in front of us we have everything we're going to need. We have a small bottle of water, we have a brush, a very cheap brush, a couple stir sticks, a container to mix the stuff in, a small container that we can clean our brush off, some water-based wood filler. We've also got a pair of gloves and some rags. And so with all that, let's go ahead and get started. So what we want to do now is we want to create our filler and we need to fill in the fins and the spirals on the body tube. So we're going to begin by creating our filler. We're going to use this water-based wood filler. And now we'll add just a little bit of water to it. And if we need to, we can always add more water later. You want to mix this really well. It should be about the consistency of a thick paint. The nice thing is if this starts to thicken up, we can always go back and add a little bit more water to it to thin it back down. And I'm only adding a couple drops of water at a time so I can get it to the consistency that I need it. You can see it sticks to the stir stick, but it's also thin enough to where we can start sealing our fins with it. Here we use our old paintbrush, cheap paintbrush. We want to fill the fin with the filler. So what we want to do is as we apply this, we want to kind of press it in a little bit. We dip our brush in some water and now we can start smoothing filler onto our fin. There we go. You also want to try to get this as smooth as you can. Most of this is going to be sanded off, and so if it's real thick, that's more sanding you're going to have to do. And so we have a pretty good covering. Don't forget you also need to do the edges of the fin. You want those to be filled as well. Try to smooth it out so you'll have less sanding to do when this all dries. So now we have one side of one fin completely filled. We'll go ahead and do the rest of the fins and then we'll set this aside to dry. Now that we have all our fins filled, we'll move on to the spirals in the body tube. So we have our fins filled. The next thing we want to do is fill the spirals on the body tube. One of the things that you can do to make the spirals a little bit easier to see is run a pencil inside the groove. Depending on the body tube, sometimes the spirals are a little bit hard to see, or you may actually see a spiral that's below where you need to fill. Here we're taking our pencil and we're showing where the spiral is so we know what to fill. Some tubes are easier to see the spiral than others, and it also depends on how well the tube is made as to how easy it is to see. So now that we have it marked, we can go ahead and start filling these spirals. We're using the same filler that we used on the fins. A lot of times it seems like the filler on the spirals works better if it's just a little bit thicker than what you used on the fins. And all we want to do is just fill in that little groove so when we sand it, it will all be smooth. Now in this case I'm using a brush. You don't have to use a brush. I know some folks like to use toothpicks, and we'll show that here in just a second. Some folks will use the edge of a knife blade. If you've not filled spirals before and this is your first time, try different things, see what works for you. So now we're going to switch over from the brush to a toothpick, and we'll continue this process all the way down the body tube. Again, try to be as neat as you can, because you're going to have to sand this stuff down once it dries. So the neater you make it now, the less sanding you will have to do later on. And you might have noticed that as the filler is beginning to thicken, the process goes a little bit faster because it tends to stick better in those grooves. Now, you do not have to do all this. Many a rocket has been flown with no paint at all on it, and it will fly just fine without paint. You can apply paint directly to the wood if you so choose, but if you want to try to get a really nice looking finish to where you don't see the wood, you don't see the spirals on the paper tube, then you're going to need to do some type of process like this prior to paint. There are other ways of filling tubes. There's other ways of filling fins. I use this one because this one has worked for me very well over the years. I've gotten very good results with it. And once I find something that works, I tend to stick with it. I'm not worried about the spirals on the launch lug. Those are typically going to be very thin, and to be honest with you, looking at this lug, it's very hard to see the spirals. And I think once we apply primer and sand everything down, I think that will take care of the spirals on the launch lug. So we now have the fins filled and we have the spirals filled. We'll want to go ahead and let this dry completely, and then after it's dry, we'll come back and sand it down. So we let the wood filler dry, and then we went and we sanded the fins down. We started with 220 grit and then went to 320 grit sandpaper. And this is the result. Now, one of the things that you will notice on here is that we do have some bare spots. This is probably one of the biggest ones right here. So what we'll do is we'll mix up a little bit more of our wood filler, just like we did when we first started. We'll fill in those areas, let that dry, come back and sand it. And we don't have to do all the fins. All we need to do is get these little thin areas where we didn't have quite enough wood filler on to begin with. So we'll fill those areas in, let them dry, sand them down, and we should be good for primer. And when we put the coat of primer on, we'll see just how good our preparation has been. So we have our first coat of primer on, and now we can start to see the results of some of the prep work that we've been doing. First off, one of the things you may notice, and I'll see if I can get it on the camera here, we have these areas, they're kind of fuzzy, and this comes from when we sanded down the body tube to begin with. And what we'll do is we'll sand those down again. We'll start with 320. We'll sand them down, get it smooth, and then we'll apply another coat of primer. We can also see where most of our fins are looking good. We can see there's a little bit of roughness on this edge here. We've also got a little bit of grain showing through in a couple areas. You can see it somewhat here. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. Again, we got a little bit of roughness here. So what we will do is we will take our 320 grit sandpaper, sand this down, and then we'll give it another shot of primer. We'll get it all smooth again. And this is one of the reasons for the primer. It helps us see the areas that we've missed, and now we can go back and correct those. We'll sand this down, hit it with another coat of primer, and then we'll come back and look at the results. So we have completed our second primer coat and we're real happy with the results, but we're not ready for color coat yet. What we're going to do is we're going to sand this primer down again. If you run your fingers along, you will feel it's still a little rough. So what we're going to do is we're going to sand this down. First, we're going to hit it with the 320 grit sandpaper dry. That'll knock down most of the heavy stuff. Then we'll hit it with 320 wet, and that'll help really start smoothing this thing out. And then we'll hit it with 600 grit wet sandpaper. Once we get all that done, we'll wipe it down. We should have a nice, smooth, even finish, and we can go ahead and get ready to do the color coat. So we have finished doing our dry sanding and our wet sanding. We're really happy with the way this thing is looking. She's all ready for paint, and we will be looking at adding that base white coat. So that's going to wrap up this episode. If you've enjoyed this episode and like what we're doing here, we encourage you to click on the like button and subscribe to our channel. So until next time, wishing you all the best and take care.